evening, everyone. I hope you're doing good. Today we will talk about Hanibal Alkhas, the great Hannibal Alkhas. I would say one of the greatest Assyrian artists, and we're going to be focused on Hannibal Alkhas's role in Assyrianism, meaning I want to focus as to his thoughts on not just art and poetry in particular, his writing, his thinking. Hanibal Alkhas, I would say, was one of the most significant Assyrians who earned fame throughout the world, the artistic world in particular, for many, many decades. And so he is someone who's very important. He was well known, well versed in art and poetry, well versed in philosophy, but always was very close. So he was kind of global on the one hand, but very close to his people on the other. Okay, so we're going to ask some questions today, and then I'm going to offer the answers as much as we can. First of all, what was the environment that he experienced? What were the challenges in his life? What personal um, difficulties did he have? What did he struggle with? Did he stray away from his parents, his father, his people? Did he return? Did he come back? So we're going to talk about that as expressed in his poetry. What are the sources of our knowledge for Hannibal? And we're going to look into the poems that he wrote. I will read some in Assyrian to express his thoughts. I've translated his poems, some of his poems, and with the assistance of some of the material was written or translated, I should say, by Marcel Josephson or Marcel Bit Yosef, who is an Assyrian from Iran, who is one of the people who typed or typeset a lot of the poetry that Hannibal wrote when Hannibal was in California. They were both in California, Marcel Josephson and Hanibal Alkhas. And Marcel wrote a piece in Jazz, which is the journal of the Assyrian Academic Society, on Hanibal Alkhas in 2008. Then there are other presentations on Hanibal Alkhas. Many are by Iranians, some are by American writers and European writers. I cite here as an example from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Hannibal was not only an artist, but he was very cognizant of poetry being written in various languages. He had a fascination with many poets, among them Shemlu in Iran, but always Hannibal stuck to his roots throughout the images he portrayed, many times writing his name in the Assyrian alphabet, perhaps as a tribute to the influence of his father. But we are told in this painting, obviously seen clearly by others, that it evokes Assyrian reliefs, his dedication to his heritage as an Assyrian and Iranian, of course. And Hannibal, it needs to be stressed, was a world figure. He was very, very loved in Iran by the artist community, by many in Iran, and he took great joy at educating children. I should say that I also knew Hannibal and corresponded with him for a number of years. He had come to Chicago to perform for the Assyrian Universal Alliance Foundation, under then the directorship of Ms. Helen Schwarten, the Illinois State Senator John Nimrod, and Mr. Homer Asharian. And he had a beautiful performance where he painted a large mural as the late Nabu Isabe played piano. So as one Assyrian played the piano, another Assyrian, Hannibal Alkhas, painted, and many of the themes were Assyrian. That painting, by the way, is not completed. It's housed at the Ashurbanipal Library or at the AUA Foundation right now, or Assyrian Cultural Foundation. So always, although he was a global figure, internationally recognized, Hannibal was very close to his roots. And when he wasn't, he had a great deal of regret, as we will explore today. Now, this painting by Edward Haydu is from Australia, and it portrays in it Nebu Isabe at the lower right-hand corner. Above him, Binyamin Gendilu, Amobaba, Matviv in Russia, Nimrod Simono, who was close to Hannibal Alkhas's father, Adde Alkhas, and also to Hannibal Alkhas. And important to know that Hannibal comes from and is descended from the what we call the Golden Age. Often we refer to the Golden Age of Assyrian literature in Iran, which was the 1950s, 60s, up until the 70s. And then that inspired a movement in Iraq when freedoms were allotted to Assyrians to publish their own. The inspiration had come from Slita Sapreta, or the Literary Committee of Assyrians in Tehran, Iran specifically. And there was an explosion of writing at that time in the Assyrian language, which was also picked up in Iraq in the 1970s, a lot being produced by not only members of the Church of the East, but also members of the Chaldean Church and the Syriac Orthodox. Of course, these writings were largely not focused on Assyrianism, because one must recognize that Iraq in the 1970s was controlled by the Baathists, whose philosophy was oriented or inspired by Arab nationalism. And so the tolerance for other nationalisms or ethno nationalisms was limited. So Iraq did not tolerate the expressions of, going back to the ancient past, being proud of oneself as an Assyrian in the same manner that Assyrians of Iran experienced. So there was a different experience, although there was more, one could say, assimilation in Iran into Iranian culture. In Iraq, there was less of that, but there was more restriction. So Hannibal Alkhas was born in 1930. He's the son of Adde Alkhas, who is going to move this here. Standing above Hannibal in his high chair are his mother, Hilda, and his father, Adde Alkhas. Adde Alkhas sporting a Hitler-like mustache, which was something that was popular among many Assyrians for various reasons. I have a photograph here behind me in the 1930s. A lot of the men in the photograph have this type of mustache. Why is that? Ask me at some other class, and perhaps I'll explain it. But he spent his childhood and teenage years in Kermanshah, Iran, Ahwaz, and then later in Tehran. His uncle John Alkhas, of course, is one of the most famous poets in the 20th century. We've talked about John Alkhas. In 1951, he moved to the United States and studied philosophy for 3 years at Loyola University in Chicago. From 1953 to 59, he was at the Art Institute, where he earned his bachelor's and master's of fine art. In 1959, after his father passed away, he returned to Iran and began teaching at the Tehran School of Fine Arts for nearly 4 years, where he was very, very popular. During the time, he also established a successful Gilgamesh Academy or Gallery, the first modern art gallery in Iran, where aspiring young artists were introduced. And sure enough, Hannibal inspired many and is admired by many artists in Iran. In 1963, he returned to the United States and taught art at Monticello College in Illinois. And he became chairman of the art department. During this time in Chicago, by the way, Hannibal had limited friendships with Assyrians based on my conversations with my great uncle, Sam Parhat, my maternal great grand uncle or great uncle, not great grand uncle. And we used to speak about Hannibal often, but he did not generally mix with the larger Assyrian population in Chicago at the time. He returned to the US, as I said. He would go back and forth, and then he went back to Iran and taught at a university there. And he held that position since 1992. He had private painting classes also in Iran. And was writing critical articles, critiques in Iranian magazines, art magazines, and poetry magazines. In 1969, he went back again to Iran. He would go back and forth and taught at Tehran University for approximately 11 years. In 1980, it's important to point out that he spent several years teaching art at the Assyrian Civic Club of Turlock, private colleges, and the University of California at Berkeley and Los Angeles. He had also expressed to me, I'm going to intersperse some of my own experiences with Hannibal because I think they're pertinent to this class. He expressed a great deal of disappointment at Assyrian organizations based on his experience with many of them. And one of them was his experience in Turlock. He felt that he was not given the opportunity. He wanted an opportunity to train Assyrian students in the arts. And he felt that there was a great deal of resistance to that on the part of many of those in charge. I don't know the names of those people or which organization, but he expressed a general disappointment. Here we have an older picture of Hannibal and his family. There's his mother, his father, Edde, his younger brother, Marduk, and this is his sister, Bilit. Notice that all their names are ancient Assyrian, non-traditional Assyrian names, which Edde and John Alkhas, oftentimes they were inspired by Assyrian history or history in general and rejected or looked with a bit of disdain at what came just before. So they were not overly religious. None of them, although they were educated as within Catholic circles, they certainly were not religious. There's John John Alkhas, the uncle with Hanibal Alkhas. Hanibal Alkhas, no doubt, was inspired. And the week before last, I read a poem by Hanibal Alkhas about his uncle, Taniqati, Mamuni Taniqati, which talked about, it was heaped a great deal of praise on John Alkhas, but Hanibal Alkhas is asking his uncle, tell me, my uncle, why did you never marry? Why did you not enjoy life? You dedicated yourself to your nation. You refrained from enjoying your life, and your entire life was really based on protecting the poor and the vulnerable and uplifting those who had fallen and helping your nation. So Hannibal picked up a lot of this. That poem, which I'm not going to repeat here, but that poem is really also a reflection of the aspirations of Hannibal Alkhas. He was always interested in assisting the poor, always progressive in his thinking, always for the rights of women, for example, was very progressive when it came to that. In fact, his paintings often portray a great deal of praise and admiration for women because they were oppressed in society. He has a poem about how difficult a woman works in a traditional Assyrian home, and he shows a great deal of admiration. Obviously, he had a great deal of admiration for his father, but he also loved and admired his mother, and he had a great deal of sympathy for the women who endured persecution and alienation in society. Hannibal in Chicago in the 1950s. Here he is back in Chicago in 2006 at the Art Institute on Michigan Avenue. Um, this is the Hannibal that I remember, and from before, the years before, the late 80s and 90s. Um, and he was full of life. He was full of thoughts. And I often say this, Hannibal, he's one of the few people that I can say truly that as a celebrated person, he was not only humble, but so layered in his thinking, very deep. And the more you knew Hannibal, the more you admired him, the more you got to know him, the more you saw that he had incredible skills and an incredible mind. And of course, great credit goes to him and his education and his experiences, but also to his father and his uncle in terms of his intellect. Now, there's one theme that's very important and that's intrigued me and has something also to do with the theme of Assyrianism here. Hannibal strays for many years. He leaves his father, he goes to the United States. And of course, communication is not at that time what it is now. People do not communicate. There's no TikTok, there's no internet, there's no emails. And so his father feels perhaps his son has strayed. And so this is kind of metaphoric in a way for the relationship of Hannibal also with his culture, with his roots. And we see that come through his poetry. There are many theoretical writings, for example, by Hegel, Ernest Renan, by Carl Jung, by others who portray this relationship between father and son, similar in a way to between one and a culture or a heritage. And so there's this love that Hannibal has for his father, but he also wants to go away. So I don't want to get too overly psychoanalytical here with this relationship. But as far as this relationship's impact on his Assyrianism, I think it's very interesting that he distanced himself. He did not really start writing Assyrian until he was in his 40s, which was late in life. And what he did, he certainly poured out much of the inspiration that he got from his father, and I would say in particular from his uncle, John. So Hannibal, again, was known for his art. He began to write Assyrian late in life, and he studied philosophy, he studied art. He wrote over 700 poems in Assyrian after the age of 40. Khorahwara, Khorakuma, Malikrama. There are so many of these poems, and I'm going to cite one today because, or two, actually three, but one is indicative of his longing to be close to his culture, his people, his heritage. And later in life, Hannibal, although he had become a worldly man going around the world in various countries, in Spain, in Italy, touring England and the United States, and so on, came back home. He definitely had an address. And of course, he also translated from Pushkin, the great Russian writer, from Hafez, the great Persian poet, and Carl Sandburg, the American poet. He has translated, and I have to find out about this. I still do not know where this book is, but there's a translation of 100 ghazals from Hafez, the most celebrated Persian poet from Farsi to Assyrian. And these are also accompanied by Hannibal's art. And the book, from what I understand, is very beautiful, but I have yet to come across this book. Now, why did he write about Hafez? I want to say something about this. He was a great admirer. He personally gave me the recording of the poems that he had done and read out loud, and told me that he really admired many of the themes that Hafez stood for or advocated. Love and mysticism is full in his poetry. Like Hafez, Hannibal was very critical of the hypocrisy that he saw around him. He loved life. He loved enjoying life. He admired people having freedom to enjoy life, hated that people were repressed, particularly women. And he stood for the complexity of human nature. And I'll give you a couple of examples of the way he thought. He had a disdain for the orderly, the ordinary, the you could say restricted way of life, and loved to question authority. He loved to question the way things were. If he was ever told this is the way it is and there's no other way around it, he would always question. So one funny example, anecdote, is he would go into McDonald's and ask, because of the way they had done things in a very orderly mass production way, he would ask for example, to put for the workers to put a tomato on his fish fillet sandwich, and they would say, we don't do that. We don't put tomatoes on fish fillet sandwiches. And he would say, why not? Bring the manager and let me talk to him. And I would ask him, why do you do that? And he would say, I just want people to get out of the restricted way they've been taught to do things. I mean, what's the big deal about putting a slice of a tomato on a fish fillet sandwich? So just an example of the way Hannibal thought. That is one anecdote that I always remember. Hannibal also was a very positive person in his thinking, and he stood for overcoming. And I believe this also impacted his view on Assyrianism, although I'm going to read from a poem that he wrote about a heated discussion among people, among certain Assyrians, that is a reflection on what he viewed as unreasonableness. So although he thought that we can overcome as a people many of the situations that we lived in, through wisdom, through understanding, through education, he was very critical, on the other hand, of the great big ideas, the impossible ideas that some of our people hold. And so we're going to talk about that. But one very interesting book, a very beautifully written book, is Khorakuma Khorahwara. Um, I misquoted here. Khorahwara Khorakuma. It's Khorakuma Khorahwara. And this is the story of a boy who grows up in a town where it does not snow. When he sees snow, he makes a snowman. He's very happy with the snowman. He quickly learns when the weather changes, the snowman melts. He's very sad about this. He goes to his mother. His mother inspires him to create now with mud another man, another, instead of a snowman, a mud man, as it were. And that's the Khorahwara, Khorakuma. The snowman, he counts as a friend. The mudman, he counts as a friend. He sees that as the weather changes, things change, and he loses, quote unquote, loses this friend, or so the child thinks. This is, by the way, told in very beautiful poetry in Assyrian, and I'm going to read you just a few lines. But the point of the story is that the boy is taught never to give up on either relationships or on creation, on art, on the achievement of a particular task. So this book was written in Persian in the beginning, and then Hannibal translated the book into Assyrian. I have an original copy here, which is very prized by me. And this is a beautifully written tale. Probably, I would say, I've seen the writings of many children's books in Assyrian. Probably the most beautifully written children's book I have ever seen. I mean, I used to read this to my son when he was very little, and he enjoyed it, and he still recalls it. So let's talk about this, because in a way, this also figures into his thoughts about whether we as a people can achieve certain things. And he was very fond of teaching children that they can achieve, as well as women. As I said, he had a very um, strong love for the vulnerable in society. He certainly was very progressive in his thinking about that. And here is just a translation from the tale, from this book. Mother, mother, listen to me. If my friends do not return, meaning the snowman or the mudman, you will not see my face again. So he grows angry at his mother. Now his mother held his hand and said, my beloved son, from your mother and your home, you think running away will end your difficulty? Perhaps this is also a reflection of Hannibal's departure from home. Um, no, my beloved son, let's talk heart to heart. Do not depart and do not speak from your mother here a couple of words. The light of your skill do not put out. In other words, you have a skill, don't give up on it. Make another friend, make you another friend. Let your hands delve into mud again. Let's go, let's start working. And then his mother tells him the lesson of life. Ubze Bruni qadunya di. Know this world, Bruni. Brita dilamlita mqawamiyate. This world is full of events, of happenings. Itin imme prishib shimme khorawate. There are in the hundreds with different names of friends. Khorakuma, Khorahwara, Khoradyuma, Khoradora. A black friend, a white friend. This is not a racial expression, of course. This is to talk about a snowman and a mudman. Khoradyuma, Khoradora, a friend for a day, as it were, a friend for a century or an age. Khora akhwarda, khora akhkitwa, a friend as a flower, a friend as a thorn. Khorat qeta, khorat sitwa, a friend in summer, a friend in winter. Khorat yumanit khaduta, a friend in the days of happiness. Khorat khishya usebuta, a friend in sorrow and old age. Qakul khora bikul shimma, up khora min germa udimma. For each friend in whatever name they use, even a friend from bones and blood, meaning from flesh and blood. Yarik biruni rama bshimma, you, my son, you with a high name, with an important name, perhaps a reference to his people. Raba rachtut, zoda chabtut, sole partut. A beautifully written in Assyrian. Raba chabtut, you, my son, you must struggle a lot. Zoda chabtut, you must try more. Sole partut, literally to rip your shoes or wear out your shoes from trying. So it's a tale of overcoming. It's a tale of not giving up. This, of course, is to teach children, but there's, I believe, much more in this tale than simply a child's tale. Hannibal also translated a lot by Pushkin, the Russian writer, a beautifully written poem that I'm not going to have time to go into today because I want to focus on the poem on Urmi specifically, which was published by the Assyrian American Association of San Jose in 2008. And these images, by the way, come from Marcel Josephson's or Marcel Bit Joseph's um, uh, writings on Hanibal Alkhas from 2008 in conjunction with the Assyrian Academic Society and the Assyrian American Association of San Jose. So I owe, I should say, my courtesy to them. I want to start talking about this poem Urmi. In Urmi, he talks about Anu, the god Anu, reuniting him with his father, Spirit. His father is now gone, he's passed away. So Hannibal is reaching to his past spiritual spiritual faith, as it were, possibly by referencing Anu, although he certainly was not believing in an ancient religion. He's rather referring to his nation, his people, and he's admiring the history of his people. He's written a lot. Adepa is one of the poems that he's written about ancient Assyrian past. But here he says he's talking to his father, wishing the spirit of his ancestors to bring him with the spirit of his father in the context of Urmi, where lies his native land. Qashurayat ba'uti, for the beginning of my request. Da ba'uta asura gdila bshirshat ituti, tied to my origins, ituti, my existence, to the origins of my existence. Ta marashle min qora, come awake him from his grave. O Babi Raba Gura, that father of mine who's very old. Adde Alkhas bar Sauni Binyamin. Adde Alkhas, the son of my grandfather Binyamin. How in Risha Yantulia, whether awake or sleeping. Qashrara Pshimme Kiamin, I swear to his name. When I am swearing, I swear to his name. Ate Ldishtach Shaminta, let him come to your fertile valley or your fertile plain. Achtki Chazinna Khulmi, like I see in my dream, Tiwa Hamzume Ummi, sitting and talking to me. Ya Urmi, Urmi, Urmi. Ya Babi Qabil Shlami, O Father, accept my greetings. Shlame Shlime Bqalami, greetings full of peace in my pen or from my pen. Ta menshi le'o chiura. So chiura in Assyrian is either anger or distancing. Best way I can think about it. يقرأ اللب طورا, the heavy, the weight of this anger of yours, my father. Of course, he's talking to the spirit of his father. It weighs on me, as it were. Aega shaktu khareta, that last look of yours, al shikli tiwa bkawe, on my picture which sat by the window. La hamune khamindi lehawe wiyewa hawe, for something, not believing that something would happen, and it would happen, which is that his son had been distanced. Brunoch Bukhra Hanibal, your firstborn son Hanibal, Bukhra, meaning the firstborn son in Assyrian. Guira Qardan Ukhreta has married a foreign woman. O Ebu Qaroch Babeta, and that inquisition of yours, that fatherly inquisition. Ekyevid Bruni Chisha, where have you gone, my son? Min uqruch shirshuch prisha, and separated yourself from your roots, from your origins. Min umtuch rikhqa pisha, from your nation you've distanced yourself and strayed far. Shu'alina min baba, these are the questions from a father. It kidari bjana darba, that wound the self. Dimmo minno libbik dam dimmi, from this the hearts bleed, from these types of questions, inquisitions. Ya urmi, urmi, urmi. Kulcha sortad ki geshqan. Kulcha sortad ki gershin. Every image I paint. Kulcha khabrad ki pershin. Every word I choose. In ultura yama geshqan, when I look even to the mountain or the sea. Yen Mhafez Mshukhta Peshqan, or when I translate from the poet Hafez. Kilya Pata Gupata, standing face to face, At Babi Dwiqanata, you, my father, listening. Harki Hawin Salmune, I'm always imagining. Itmudiwit at Takhmune, what are you thinking? I'm always imagining, what are you thinking, father? Bil ghulti yanhtiyati, between my sins and between my mistakes and sins. Mudiwit at khajbune, what are you counting? What are you considering? Harki havin mawduye, I am always confessing. Al ghulti ubiyuch nonuye, and confessing and to my mistakes and begging you, asking you that you reconsider. It peshin bra'yanoch puchla, so that I am in your thoughts forgiven. Hoya it arik min kyodi, to escape from my liver. It's an Assyrian expression, but to escape from me. Aha marra gdila puchla, this pain that I have that is tied with this illness of mine. Bisrapa gildi ugermi, pulling from, taking away from my skin and my bones, meaning the pain that he's experiencing, physical pain of possibly not being forgiven by his father. Ya urmi, urmi, urmi. Again, tying the relationship of the father with the homeland. Shinne wurrund prisheven, the years have gone by that I have separated, or the years that I have passed since I've left. Minde bachta nukhreta, that I've left that foreign woman that you possibly were not happy with. Shinne wurrund prisheven, the word prisha is chosen also, in addition to separated. Chosen, barzogya atureta, an Assyrian woman. Shinne wurrund grisheven, the years have passed and I have pulled from min tash'ita soriate, I pulled or painted from history images. Something would have pleased his father because he was a proud Assyrian. Shinne wurrun udgrishemen, and years have passed, and I've pulled chisha husli mshuchiate. From sorrow came these poems. I have written poems. Tundileven bnatiate. I have, this is an Assyrian expression. I have learned, in other words, I have learned my lesson. Tundileven bnatiate. I have hung, literally hung from the ears. Chabranoch aknashiate. Your words like earrings. So when Assyrians say, Hoya owa chabraha machnash dabnatuch, meaning always remember, hang it on your ear as if you put an earring, means remember my words of advice. Always remember. Chabranoch aknashiate, mshuchiate dawanaye, poems that are golden or golden poems. Ra'yanoch gawanaye, your thoughts at large. O khubbat itwa blibbuch, the love that you had in your heart. O nuran pilab ubbuch. Ubba is bosom in Assyrian. The fire that you had in your bosom, meaning his father's love for his nation, for his literature. It blibbi ubbi udimmi. There is also in my heart, in my bosom, in my blood. Ya urmi, urmi, urmi. It's worth really quoting this because in this you see the love that Hannibal had for his nation, for his father, and the spirit of his father, which is really the image that is the nation here. It's a metaphor for the nation. Ya babi shwukli zamran, ya babi shmilit amran. Father, hear me, let me sing and permit me to state so that I can explain my dream and my vision. And to look into your tearful eyes. Like like a good son to hug my father. To take wings from you. Ya mabu'at yulpane. To take from you wings, O you, who is a source of knowledge. Ruchuch uruchi zawigi, your spirit and my spirit, may they come together. Aqlan ma'ar'a majwiji, to move our feet from the ground, in other words, to fly. So that we become two birds and fly. Min mata al mata archa, guests from one village to the next. Ach sayara mashucha, like a painter, meaning himself, and a poet, meaning my father, his father. Chazachla dishtit urmi, let's view the plain of Urmi. Omrano shqila shimmuch, you, because Edde, Mar Edde comes from, the name Edde comes from a church in Urmi. So he's saying, Omrano shqila shimmuch, from its churches, your name is gotten. Pchano bujurta yimmuch, and in its lap, your mother grew. Urmi yimmaqa yimmi, Urmi, the mother of my mother. Ya Urmi, Urmi, Urmi. So this poem is very moving, and I think it's revealing much more than this is my analysis, and I'm going to hone it in the coming days and weeks a little more, but it is indicative of Hannibal's distancing himself, not just from his father, but his entire nation, from his homeland, and yearning to go back. And that certainly comes through not only in his poetry, but also in his art, in his painting. Now, what type of Assyrianism did Hannibal advocate? And here I want to quote from a very amusing poem, but I think is also indicative of the thought process that Hannibal had. In in thinking about Assyrianism and the goals of the Assyrian nation as they were portrayed, or as they are portrayed by many of those who are advocates for the Assyrian cause. So the setting here is that these men are sitting around and they are what we call khwardikne, or elderly men of the village. And they are sitting around and they are thinking and arguing. And their argument is whether if each one of them was a particular leader, what would he do with the enemies of the Assyrians? So one says, if I was Hitler, I would do this. One says, if I was Stalin, I would do this. One says, if I was Roosevelt, I would do this. One says, if I had all the money in the world, I would do this. As they're sitting around talking and drinking their wine and, um, um, in this heated discussion, the women and the girls of the town are carrying buckets and they're going to a distant stream, and through this very difficult process, because this town lies on a kind of a hill, they're going to collect water, and it's very difficult, and they're coming back to the town and they're using this water to wash and to drink and to eat and to do everything that people need to do with water. And sitting listening to these people who are and I'm going to read their names, and this is also exemplary of the way that Hannibal thought, kind of comical as well, of the old guard, as it were. Sitting and listening to these is a 15-year-old boy named Ashur. Now, his name is also indicative of the beliefs of Hannibal, as well as Edde and John and others. We've talked about this, the movement to bring back the ancient Assyrian past. So the rejection of the immediate past, the rise above, remember, denominationalism, which Assyrianism stands for, is this representative figure, Ashur. Ashur interrupts these men and he says, hey, instead of talking about all of these other things, why don't we focus for like a period of a month to dig a ditch where we can have the water come from the stream up into the village. We can create a mechanism where the water can go up to where the village is, and it'll all save us a lot of headache. And we can have wheat, and we can have all of the things that we want. We'll work for a month, and we'll sit back and enjoy the leisurely life for many years, for a century. And of course, at hearing this, all of the men say, what are you talking about? We're talking about the world. We're talking about the great leaders of the world. We're talking about the big issues. You are focused on this small issue, on this stream, on this small village. What are you talking about? You're too young. The smell of your breastfeeding comes from your mouth. They tell him, you don't know anything. And so they shoo him away. And then there is an elderly man who's listening, who's not saying anything, but he's listening. He's a wise man who deciphers, and he tells the young man these words, which I'm going to quote. So what are these words that he says? And this is indicative. Contained in these words is the way Hannibal thought about Assyrianism. And I'll explain it after I read you the poem a little bit. It's kind of amusing. All right, it begins. Chayuma David Dadishu Isha Ishaya Pius Yuchanan Misha Iramia Paulus Givergis Tuma Oraham Ischak Mikhail Shuma Khwardikne Sawe Guranet Mata Guranet Beta Tiwewa Elrumta Bligit Makyapta. So right away you see the names. These are names of the older generation, as it were. They are not Ashurs, they are not Anus, they are not Hannibals. They are not names of the new generation of Assyrians who believe in Assyrianism. These are the names from the Old Testament. So these people are sitting around and they are talking, and 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 as they go on, as I explained, um, because they are this village of theirs is situated on a hilltop, and it has difficulty getting water. So as they are talking in this heated discussion, um, and Hannibal mocks them here, Pius Yohanan Misha Bnobane in turns. So Pius Yohanan Misha Bnobane in turns. Blasha Amelke Plata Galbane. They're fighting kings in this silly discussion of theirs, and they're winning. They're coming out victorious. Iramia Polis Givergis Tuma Oraham Ishak Mikhail Shuma Pasule Prama Kutre Bishraya Guran Tiwil Khmare Bakraya. In other words, they're mocking the leaders of the world, and they are plotting and planning, and Tiwewa Ashur Khamshasar Shinne. And in their midst was sitting Ashur, and he gets up and he gives them this advice. And they, of course, are very hurt by this child to them. And they say, get up, little boy, go find your mother. Your you know, your breath smells like milk, meaning you're very young. And then towards the end, Khasawa Spira Qimle al Aqle, one old man got up and stood on his feet. Qa'ashur alayma bnoshe lashwiqle. He did not allow the young person to be alone in his thinking. So this is Hannibal at his finest. He would never have allowed a young person with ideas to go unsupported, even into his late years in life. Rama hatcha muqwikhle. In a loud voice, this is what he said. Ajarya dawa khshicha mashuche. This line, which is considered golden by all poets. In other words, this is what the man says. Al-pocha qasra al-sila beta kibani sakhle bligib maqyabta. On the winds, a castle, on the sands, a house. These are what fools build when they engage in discussions. So what does this mean? Hannibal's Assyrianism was focused on culture, on literature, on the arts. He sought to engage children, was disappointed that he was not supported. Not just children, but others wanted Assyrians to be engaged in the arts. He felt this was very important. And unfortunately, like many within during the time he was alive, he was much more recognized by non-Assyrians than Assyrians. And though I hate to say that he died a broken man, because he did not. Hannibal was loved by his people, admired by many of his people, but the organizational structure among Assyrians did not give him the opportunity, unfortunately. This is an ode that was given, written by Marcel Joseph to Hannibal when he was alive, and I think it's worth quoting. Ya Hannibal Marjanyate buntarena mra'yanuch. Pearls fall from your thoughts. Now, it's important to know that Marcel actually typed all of these poems of Hannibal, so he's very familiar with the contents of his poetry. Good feelings or good sentiments come from your writings. Atiyuma it kulbne umtan mzayikhi. There will come a day when all of the nation, all of the members of the nation will be happy or will celebrate. Shuprat amnuch, amanuch, ugabbarut shulanuch, the beauty of your art and the greatness of your work. So Marcel Josephson is longing for the day and hoping that that day comes when all of the members of the Assyrian nation will appreciate the works of Hannibal Alkhas. Hannibal, of course, wrote more than 700 poems, one more beautiful, more organized, more unique than the other. He picked up where John Alkhas had left off, and he left us gems. And it is important to understand and to read this literature. Highly recommended. But I think that Hannibal, through his art, also spoke. And it is next, that is what we will turn to next when we talk about Hannibal Alkhas. Thank you.